This is the IDP After Show.
Hi all, Jase here bringing you the latest episode of the IDP After Show, and we've got a really fun topic to discuss today as we're talking about Dynasty IDP buy, sells and holds. We'll be nominating and discussing 27 IDPs at various defensive positions who falls into one of those three categories. Regular listeners will know I've always got some of the best IDP minds as guests on the show, and joining me today to offer their considerable knowledge is not one guest but two. And it's my pleasure to welcome, or should that be welcome back to the show, contributor at the IDP Show, Scott Soltis, aka Professor IDP, and contributor at both the IDP Show and DLF, Jason King, aka IDP King. Gents, it's great to have you both on again. How are you both keeping?
Doing well. I'm always happy to be here and love talking Dynasty. So much of the stuff that I do in season is week to week streaming and things like that. So really enjoy these conversations. I'm having my buddies over text all the time now, and to be able to do it with the two of you is, really fantastic.
Yeah,
and Jason,
I agree. It's great. It's great to be on your show, Jase. You do a great job with it. It's one of my favorite listens over the course of the year. So the only reason I hate to be on is because I don't get to listen to it in the morning when I'm driving in. So because I've already been on it. So, but you do a great job with it, Scott. I haven't been on the show with you yet, but really looking forward to chatting it up with you.
Yeah,
well, it's a strong roster tonight. Looking forward to the Super Bowl, guys.
More or less. Yeah. For me, I think Jason and I both made the same face at the same time.
You did.
I don't know. I think many people have Chiefs fatigue. I am a Penn Stater, so I love Saquon Barkley. So I definitely have a team that I'm pulling for. Also, half of my family is from the Philadelphia area, so have some ties out there. But I wouldn't really call myself an Eagles fan. I don't have any jerseys or anything like that, but still be nice to see Saquon, who I watched in college, get a title here in the NFL, and also nice to see the Chiefs lose because I am a Bengals fan, and they've beaten us up plenty, and just, they've become one of my least favorite teams very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, imagine how I feel as a Chargers fan. That's just pain. It's been a very difficult period for me, but hey, it is what it is. Now, after teeing up the question about the Super Bowl, I'm going to pull the rug on that topic because we're not actually here to talk about that. We're here to discuss the Dynasty IDP buy, sells, and hold. Now, we're each going to take it in turns to nominate a player at linebacker, defensive line, and defensive back, and we're going to talk about them in that order. So to kick us off, I'll pick on you first, Scott. Tell us which linebacker you think Dynasty IDP managers should be trying to buy right now.
So, yeah, I'm a buyer of TJ Edwards for the Bears. One of the things I did as I was kind of going through this exercise was I looked at Adam's Dynasty ranks, because one of the things I love about Adam's Dynasty ranks is he puts the value that he would trade the player for, to give a sense of that. And I've used that to guide some of my IDP trades in the past. And Adam has TJ Edwards as a trade value of a third. To me, that's a great price to be buying at. He was LB12 in 2024. He only had one game under 10 points, so he was highly consistent. He's 28 years old, which isn't young, but is also not that old for linebackers. When we look at the Bobby Wagners and Demario Davises and Levante Davids and all the players who've been able to have that sustained success for some time. His PFF grades are good. I know that's not the be-all, end-all, especially for linebackers. We've seen some terrible real linebackers put up fantastic fantasy stats in the past, but the fact that he does have good PFF numbers should help him to retain his job. He was the 33rd ranked starting linebacker. He was actually 5 spots ahead of teammate Tremaine Edmonds. So, he was a little bit up there. And one of the other things I love for when I model linebacker performance for some of my decisions is snaps. He was 13th in the NFL in linebacker snaps last season. So a lot of reasons why I'm interested in TJ Edwards. Also, not a lot of uncertainty about him. I read a couple of Bears cut candidates articles. He didn't pop up on any of them. Looking at his salary, he was paid in the 20s or 30s in terms of linebacker salary. So, he wouldn't be that advantageous to cut. So, give me TJ Edwards, if I'm on the clock, even at like 301, and someone's willing to give me TJ Edwards, especially given how underwhelming a lot of the rookie linebackers have been in the past couple of years, rather than throw a dart on the most recent rookie, I would take that consistency in Edwards.
Yeah, no complaints here. He's a safe option, I think, isn't he? And he's just so reliable, as you say. A bit more up and down this year, maybe, than he's been other years. But as I say, no complaints here. So, Jason, over to you. Which player do you have as for us here?
Yeah, I'll take TJ Edwards over my guy any day of the week. But I'm just going to go with a big upside swing. And so I've picked Jaylon Carlies of the Indianapolis Colts. You may end up with a repeat of his rookie season where Carlies was just kind of a stash. And he was really only worthy of lineup consideration when EJ Speed was out. But you might end up with EJ Speed production. And, of course, Speed is a free agent. And with all of kind of those end-of-season shenanigans there in Indianapolis, I'm thinking Speed will not be back as Lou Anarumo comes in and as the new defensive coordinator there and then looks to change up the culture. So I personally think that Speed's just kind of an easy guy for Indy to let walk. He'll be 30 this summer. Debatable as to whether or not he's actually a good all-around linebacker. And then Carlies, he spent his rookie year learning the ropes as a linebacker after converting from college safety. But there's opportunity. It's their calling. And this may change once we get into free agency. But for now, I'm looking to pick up Jaylon Carlies on the cheap.
I love that you've mentioned him here because I was just talking to Josh the other day about what his view, as a Colts fan, was on Carlies and whether or not he is the successor to Speed. His feeling was that they're probably going to bring a free agent in, but you've got to be excited about what Carlies did when he was on the field. Admittedly, it wasn't that much, and in the one game where he did play, almost full-time snaps, I was not as impressed as I was in some of those other games, but yeah, he looks like definitely a very intriguing option, and it's one of those ones that's really low risk because he's going to cost you very little, but the rewards could be huge, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's just an upside swing at this time of the year. We really don't know what's going to happen in free agency. A lot of the players we have on our rosters right now are going to lose value. It's a risk, but this is like a really low cost risk, and the upside's pretty high.
Yeah,
sure.
And another sneaky reason why I like that is, some people might be concerned with Indy switching defensive coordinators if they're not going to be that LB production factory, which should further lower the cost of Carlies if you're trying to get them. But look at what Anarumo did with Wilson and Pratt when they were both healthy last year. They were both LB1, LB2s. He can put out there two fantasy viable linebackers in his defense as well, which is another good reason why if you throw this dart and you hit, it could be just an absolute banger for you.
Yep.
Absolutely. So for me, I swore to steer clear of all chief linebackers until Spags left town, but Leo Chenal is a player I'm looking to buy right now, and this really depends, obviously, on what happens with Nick Bolton. Because if he gets an extension, then Chenal's outlook looks pretty grim, doesn't it? I mean, in that scenario, barring injury to the guys ahead of him, Chenal will be playing, sub 40% of the snaps in most games, and that, of course, would make him a pretty worthless IDP behind, as I say, Bolton and Tranquil. But the Chiefs don't have a huge amount of cap space, so maybe they let Bolton go, roll with Tranquil as the number one, and move Chenal up the depth chart. And if that happens, then Chenal ends up with, similar snap volume to what Tranquil saw last year, around that sort of 800 snaps a year kind of thing. So honestly, that's a situation I can see playing out. I mean, Bolton hasn't set the world alight since that big year in 2022. Tranquil's remained pretty steady. He's a very capable guy. Chenal has actually improved every year to the point where he was the highest graded linebacker among the three, according to PFF. So, as I say, obviously losing Bolton, it's still up in the air. If they did lose him, they'd obviously bring in some competition. But to my mind, Chenal is still a low-risk, medium reward to make right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I got to say I love that buy. I think a lot of people probably have Chenal on their list of buys this offseason. And it obviously does really hinge on what happens there with Bolton. But, Tranquil, don't think that's an insurmountable linebacker to overcome. And he's a little bit older too. I'm not sure off the top of my head what his contract situation is like, but you've got a young up and coming guy there in Chenal and in a great situation on, obviously a team that's a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I like it.
Great opportunity for him, I think. So let's talk about the linebacker cells then, Scott. What have you got for us here?
So hear me out. I know this one might come across a little hot takey, but I'll explain. My cell is Jack Campbell, who's a linebacker for, as everyone knows, the Detroit Lions. Now, I think Campbell definitely showed a lot of that promise in the second half of this season. We saw his PFF grade for the season was great. He was the 4th overall rated linebacker. He was 18th in snaps at the position, which isn't great, but improved a lot as the season went on, and he assumed a full-time role even there towards the end. He was LB 25 in fantasy production, so the production didn't quite match the snap volume and the talent, but I'm not necessarily down on Campbell. The reason why Campbell is a sell for me is, again, going back to Adam's dynasty chart, he has him with a trade value of a second. And I do believe you can get a second for Campbell in a lot of IDP leagues. And if I can get a second for him, I would take it. And I would be very happy about that. There's a lot of guys, like I just mentioned, TJ Edwards, who has a valuation of a third. So if I can get Edwards and a third for a Jack Campbell, because a lot of leagues have that math of 2/3 equal a second, then I would very gladly do that. Or a lot of the other guys that are proven, but might have a few more years on their record, but still several years to go. So I think Campbell is a great player. I sort of bounce back and forth between having him as a hold, because I think he is ascending. And I know Mike just did a write-up today about how he thinks we haven't seen his full potential yet. But if I can get out at this, which seems like a potential high point for him at the value of a second, replace him with maybe a few years older linebacker who's going to get me similar points and add additional draft capital, that's why I would look to sell Jack Campbell.
Interesting. There's probably the general consensus is probably that he's on the up, because he's kind of taken over that role that we've all hoped for him to have over the last couple of years. In some respects, people might think that's come a little later than they hoped for. But yeah, it's interesting you'd have him here. I don't disagree with the take. It's just it's not one I expected.
Yeah, that one's tough, because I think your logic's sound. It's just, I think we all think pretty highly of the player and the upside, but this is all about just capitalizing on perceived value, and it's no sure thing that for the next couple of years, while I think Anzalone's still under contract, that he's going to play this 100% snap role. And if you can capitalize on a peak value right now and then come back around in a couple of years or next off season and pick him back up, you can turn around the profit on that.
Yeah, and honestly, listening to you guys, I sort of have an angel and a demon on my shoulder. On the one hand, it's like, oh yeah, maybe I am going out on too much of a limb here and saying Campbell. But then, as you're talking about, it's his perceived value is incredibly high now, and I think that second might even be modest. You might even be able to get a first for him in like a 16-teamer. And if I could flip pretty much any IDP for a first-round pick, I'm going to do that almost all the time. So I get that he is a great asset to have. And I think this will be somewhat league specific, but if you really can get that early second, late first sort of range for him, because, of the shock on your faces when I said his name, if that plays into that public perception, you might be able to get great value for him. And even if he becomes, a Roquan or a Fred Warner, I've seen those guys just last season move for seconds and thirds in some of my leagues. And so if I can cash out on him now and get a player that is as good or better, but might not have as much of a runway in front of them, then I would be very happy at the end of the day, even watching him put up tons of points for whatever manager I trade him to.
You make a good point. Several good points, in fact. So, Jason, who is your linebacker sell and why?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to cause that same look on your faces with myself. So I don't know if you can actually sell Kenneth Murray for anything right now. But if he's still carrying cachet because he was a first round pick or because he was a full-time linebacker last year, I'm shopping him for assets of similar value that I just like more. He only hit double-digit combined tackles twice over 14 games this year. But your league mates, they can look at that linebacker depth chart there in Tennessee, and they're not going to see much else other than Cedric Gray and Jack Gibbons, who's an exclusive rights free agent. You could maybe use that to talk them into Murray as an LB3 starter. But he was really only a full-time guy because they didn't have anything else this season other than that period of time when they had Ernest Jones. I got to think the Titans are probably going to end up cutting Murray this offseason. I think I saw they could save like $7.6 million against the cap, even though it would result in $2.5 in dead money. But there's a good free agent linebacker class. They should be able to find an easy upgrade out there for a lot less money. I think I saw Murray has like a $1 million roster bonus due March 17th. So if you've got him rostered anywhere, I would recommend shopping him before he gets cut. And I hope Tennessee really regrets shipping off Ernest Jones.
Yeah, I feel quite strongly about Kenneth Murray, and that's largely because I kind of struggled watching him, as a Chargers fan for sort of 4 or 5 years there. I had high hopes for him when we first drafted him. I remember defending the pick to a friend of mine who's a Broncos fan at the time and saying, we really need someone in the heart of our defense to kind of take on that role. We haven't had a good off-ball linebacker for some time, and there was high expectations, lofty expectations he was going to be that guy, 23rd overall pick in the draft. But in coverage he's dreadful. No linebacker allowed more touchdowns in 2024. He's known as this kind of bigger bodied linebacker who is pretty good against the run, but that's also not who he is. If you watch Murray and only Murray on every given play for a game, you'll be disappointed that you've done so and you'll curse me for having advised you to do that. But B, you'll see that what I'm saying is true. He's not this elite run defender. He's really poor against the run. He's really poor in coverage. I'm sat here wondering why he's got this full-time gig in the NFL, to be honest with you. I don't hate him as a person, clearly, just hate him as a player. It's bizarre to me. It's really bizarre.
I love that deep stance he has right before the snap. He's like crouching down really low. That's fun to look at, but yeah, you're right. He can be a painful watch.
Yeah, for sure. Doesn't miss a lot of tackles. That's kind of the only positive thing I can say about Murray. So I'm glad you brought him up because I love any opportunity to rag on Murray. So talking of criticizing players, I'm going to do the same now with my selection at linebacker. My sell candidate is Christian Rozeboom. And, I feel a little bit bad nominating him because it's always nice to see an undrafted free agent outperform expectations, right? But he inherited rather than earned that full-time role. And if it wasn't for the Ernest Jones trade or the Troy Reader injury, I don't think Rozeboom would have barely played this year. Now, us three know, most of the IDP managers out there will know that it doesn't really matter so much how you became a starter in the NFL as long as you play well enough to remain one, right? And that's where I have issues with him as I consider his dynasty value. I know he was productive as a tackler, but he didn't play particularly well. Not so well that the Rams couldn't either upgrade him or maybe even pivot to someone like Spates, who I was kind of low-key impressed with when he got his opportunity. So and that point about kind of subpar performance may become, I think, a sticky point either for the Rams when it comes to deciding whether to bring him back in free agency or for another team as they weigh up what he can kind of bring to their team. So all things considered, I'd love to watch Rozeboom prove me wrong and make this selection look stupid, but I think it's wise to get out from under him right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because if you look in the past, you've seen like Jack Sanborn have a great end of the season for the Bears and people not know what kind of role he was going to have. I think he got traded for a third in the offseason in one of my leagues because sometimes people don't pay attention. And, sometimes you have these guys who, like you said, outperform expectations and you still want to get in while you think the market hasn't peaked. but sometimes the market actually has. And I've been looking up some, team needs going into the draft, and I consistently see the Rams with linebacker as one of their top 3 priorities, not just the draft, but the offseason in general. The player I'm going to talk about next is my hold has actually been rumored to be a target of the Rams, and we're still in the linebackers, so he is a linebacker, which would definitely eat into Rozeboom's potential there. So I like this. I think if you can get any kind of decent value, and I think this is the time when you probably can, it makes sense to me to move on.
And the list of I know that there's not the star-studded names at linebacker in the draft, but the list of linebackers available in free agency, or potentially available in free agency, because a lot can happen between now and then, or in 5 weeks' time when free agency opens. But the list of linebackers available is better than most years. So I'm probably more likely to sell a linebacker than I would in other years for that reason alone. But Scott, you mentioned your linebacker, your next linebacker, one of the free agents coming up in this class. Who have you got for us here as your linebacker hold?
So Dre Greenlaw. Hard for me to even say, like, it's hard for him to stay on the field, unfortunately. But San Francisco, currently, they're going to be moving on, most likely. The rumors are that San Francisco does want to retain him, but he is projected to be PFF's top linebacker free agent this year, so he is going to garner some attention. And, we know he's injury prone, and I think that's baked into the valuation that Adam has on him right now as a 4th. But I feel like, if he gets injured again and he's not worth anything, then the difference from a 4th to a 6th isn't nearly as great as if he plays back to his potential and gets that value up to, a 3rd or a 2nd. So I still have some hope for him. I know, I think this is a really rough time to try to trade him, because he only came back for half a game and then a handful of snaps this season after, obviously that ACL injury at the Super Bowl last year. So I don't think there's a market to trade him and make any kind of profit. I think he has a chance. He finished as a LB2 the last 2 years that he was healthy and played. So he definitely has the potential. So to me, he's a hold. He's someone that you can't really move on from yet. And because I don't think the value is there to get back. And I think this is around the floor for him. So I don't like selling low on guys. I have him in several leagues, and I'm not really putting him on my trade bait.
Yeah, no disagreement there. It's very tempting, and you see this happen quite a lot, don't you, where people get very excited about the fact that a guy is moving teams, and it's like, well, what can he do in his new team? But Greenlaw was, pre and post injury, a full-time guy in San Francisco. So it's kind of like, what more are you expecting to see from him? You're either expecting him to become more efficient, or you expect him to get really lucky with some sort of big plays, and that's dangerous territory for me. So I like this as a hold.
Yeah, I do too. I'm really curious to see if he ends up back in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. I hope he does. I think that would be the best case scenario, honestly, because we've seen what he can do alongside Warner when he's healthy. Whereas, like Jase said, you might get really excited because he goes to the Rams, who are LB needy, but I really don't think – I think his ceiling is what he has done the past couple of years with the 49ers. So I'd be much more comfortable holding him and then learning that he's going to end up staying in San Francisco.
Yep.
Yeah, I would think the free agent market too would be a little soft, just coming off the injury that he's coming off of. But I would say that if you see him walk to another team on like a lesser deal, I think that probably tells you a little bit about how San Francisco sees him returning from that injury. And if that happens, like I'd be worried if you've got shares of Greenlaw.
Yeah, I think though, going back to Scott's original point, he's a clear hold right now because we know what he can do. It's not like he's an untested player who we don't know which way things are going to go. Wherever he ends up, whether he's back with that San Fran or whether he goes somewhere else, he's going to be a full-time guy because we know he's that good. Yeah, it's a clear hold for me. So who have you got as your hold, Jason, and why?
Yeah, my guy's Troy Andersen. So if you added him in rookie drafts back in 2022, you probably spent anywhere from like a mid-second to a mid-third round draft capital on him. I really doubt you're going to recoup that if you're shopping him for a 2025 rookie pick. So to me, kind of Andersen's upside outweighs any kind of return you're going to get for him right now. Now, obviously, Caden Ellis, he's the man there in that Atlanta linebacker core. But if you do remember back in September, I know it was a long time ago now, Andersen put up some nice games as Ellis's sidekick. Week 3, he had 12 total tackles, and then he had 17 total tackles in week 4. He also had like a 47-yard pick six in that game. There's change, I know, in the coaching ranks there on the defensive side of the ball in Atlanta with Jeff Ulbrich returning to Atlanta as the defensive coordinator, and then Mike Rutenberg also coming in from the Jets. He's going to serve as their defensive pass game coordinator. But both those guys, I think, really helped develop Quincy Williams and Jamien Sherwood. So that, on the surface at least, is hopefully promising for Andersen's development. On the flip side, we don't really know how they see Andersen. And the guy's in the final year of his rookie deal. And, of course, the biggest knock on him, the dude's played in just like 9 games over the past 2 seasons, so it's been incredibly frustrating. Also, I think, Scott, you mentioned PFF scores not being the end-all, be-all. But those guys that are doing the scores do watch all the games, and they really graded Andersen average to poor for most of the season when he was on the field. Also, Nate Landman, he's an RFA, so I'm going to assume that he's probably going to be back there in Atlanta. So Andersen, if he doesn't step it up this year, he's just going to be one and done, and then solidly on that path toward being a journeyman. But just for what you can get for him right now, I can't quit on his upside just because we've seen some pretty massive production when we've seen him on the field.
Yeah, and to echo your thoughts on that, really comes back to this fact that his upside is pretty high. That he is that sort of modern linebacker. You got this sense that they kind of wanted him to become that guy. Clearly, they wanted him to become that guy, but that they wanted to play him in a role that kind of reflected the fact that they wanted him to be that guy. But then Landman came along, started splitting reps between the two of them. The injury concerns. You can't sell Andersen for very much, I don't think, at the moment, and for that reason, bearing in mind his upside, he's a really good hold. Talking of good players, conversely speaking of Andersen, but Jamien Sherwood is my linebacker hold. He's a pending free agent, as we all know, and sometimes that can be off-putting. But he, similar situation to Greenlaw, I guess, in some ways, not necessarily in how they performed this year, but he was so productive and played so well as an every down guy, I might add, that we know whatever team he's on, whether it's with the Jets or with a new team, he's going to be heavily involved, right? And at least in his case, not so much in Greenlaw's case, his kind of trajectory is pointing upwards right now. He will probably have teams competing for his services based on how he did last year, and again that gives us this kind of like warm fuzzy feeling that we know he's gonna be heavily utilized by whatever team he ends up with. So yeah, Sherwood all the way for 2025. I think anyone that's got him should kind of just sit tight and wait and see how this plays out, because whatever happens, he's going to be in a great spot.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I was just pulling up Adam's take from a dynasty perspective in his ranks. And he has Sherwood still, and he updates these things constantly. I mean, there are rookies in there already. Mm-hmm. So this isn't an antiquated valuation. He has him as worth a third. If someone offered me a third for Sherwood, I would hit reject as fast as I could. And it'd be one of those ones where I'd be really careful. I'm clicking the right link. So it's a clear reject, because I would hold him every day at that price. I think, like you said, he's going to land, if he doesn't stay in New York, he's going to land somewhere. He's likely going to have a full-time role. I don't think there's any way to sell him. And I think if you reach out to someone like me, you'd have to overpay to buy him at this point based on last year's production. So it's a great spot for a hold.
Yeah, I'm not moving him right now. I'm not actively going out and trying to buy just because of the price. Unless somebody were shopping him for a third, I would go get him then. But yeah, most leagues, it's just a hold.
And I know that, performance doesn't always correlate to production. Kenneth Murray's a really good example of that, but it does give us a sense of comfort knowing that, Sherwood is still an ascending play. This was his first year as a full-time off-ball linebacker, and he didn't get that role until, was it week 2 or was it halfway through week 1?
I think it was halfway through week 2. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like he even went through training camp and preseason, expecting to have that role. So it's something that I think just adds to his to why I'm attracted in keeping him around. So with that, we draw a line under the linebackers. Scott, let's move on to the defensive linemen. Who do you like as a buy candidate this offseason?
Yeah, if I have any opportunity to get Derrick Brown this offseason, I am going to do it. It seems like a lot of folks have forgotten just how good he is and just how early in the season his injury occurred. So going back just 1 year, because he did get hurt in week 1, had that meniscus tear, but all signs are that and I know all signs from everyone tend to sound good this time of the year, but he's already talking about being there for OTAs in April. So his recovery is very much on track, very much on pace. No reports of follow-up surgeries or anything like that. But going back just a year to 2023, he was the 2nd graded run defender per PFF, 19th graded pass rusher. He was the fantasy DT3, and he was 3rd in the NFL in snaps. So he was out there. He was productive. He was high floor, great ceiling. He was the kind of fantasy asset that you really want to have in DL, which tends to be a pretty volatile position. Another nice thing about him is they retained their defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero, and that was the same DC 2 years ago when Brown put up those kinds of numbers. So he's coming back. He seems to be on track. Adam has him worth a 4th. I was having another conversation with someone who was working on DL rankings, and they had him in like the hundreds. And I was like, no, you can't have Derrick Brown in the hundreds. I know he had an injury and everything, but I would move him up at least 50 spots. So I tend to be higher on Derrick Brown than the market, but I think if you can get him for a 4th, that seems like really, really fair value. I don't know I'd pay more than that, but he is definitely a buy for me because I still think he's a top 10 defensive tackle.
And that answers the question I was going to ask you, actually. I was reading your DL streaming article where you kind of advocate for kind of streaming defensive tackles based on the ADP of those DTs last year and their yearly finishes. And I was going to ask you if you viewed Derrick Brown as one of those guys that would be, in fact, drafted outside of the top players at the position and yet find his way into that top 10, maybe that top 12. And it sounds like that's very much the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I could see him slipping in a lot of drafts too, where you're not going to be able to stream him in most leagues, but you can get him very, very late until people start to remember who he is. And then he's someone who I could see his ADP gradually rising over the course of the offseason. So I do love to stream at those positions unless I have a stud, and I still see Brown as one of those studs who, if he gets hurt, then I'll stream. Or if he doesn't look like the same guy, then I know I have some streaming options that are going to be out there available to me. But when you have that combination that is really unique of a very high floor for a defensive tackle with sack upside, and all the snaps. I mean, those are all the things I model in my defensive tackle performance modeling. And he checks all the boxes for me. So I know coming back from injury, I know we can stream, but he's one of those guys who, if you have him, you keep him, or you buy him if you can get him for, a 4th or even maybe a really late 3rd with a 5th or 6th coming back to you on the back end.
Yeah, I like that. I like that pick a lot. He's coming off that 2023 season where he just had so many tackles. But I mean, like, even if he regresses on that, he only had 2 sacks that year. So with that many snaps, if he's going to get that kind of volume, it's going to regress upward on the sack. So he's got that upside.
So Jason, has your next guy got similar upside?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I'm going to go out. I'm going to be buying Boye Mafe. So if you remember, he had a really hair on fire start of the season. He had a sack and then 3 solo tackles in each of his first 3 games. Ended up hurting his knee kind of late in week 2. He gutted through it in week 3, missed the next 2 games. Through 7 weeks, and I know that he missed 2 games in there, but on a per game average, Mafe was by Big 3 scoring like 17 points per game. That makes him a top 6 edge. Finished the season with 6 sacks, 47 pressures, 40 total tackles. So it wasn't like, all told, it wasn't like a great season, but it was great in spurts. And I think it was probably hindered by injuries. He's coming up on his age 26 season, fourth season in the league, which means it's a contract year for him. I really like just kind of what he brings to the table as an outside pass rusher. And I like that defense under Mike McDonald. And so I think Mafe's a good pickup in those leagues where the team that has Mafe just kind of sees him as this average asset just coming off of that season. So, I'm kind of looking around with like a late third rookie pick, maybe somewhere in the fourth, and just seeing if I can pick him up there.
When I saw you mention his name, I was thinking, yeah, he did disappoint down the stretch though. I got him in a couple of leagues, and I was expecting bigger things this year because I was really impressed with last year, certainly how he started last year. And I was expecting him to kind of push on in 2024, and that didn't happen. But in saying that, I did forget about the injury. So that has to be taken into account. And maybe next year is the year that he can break that sort of double-digit barrier. He's certainly capable of doing that, isn't he?
Contract years bring out the best in players.
Funny that, isn't it? So I considered a few players here. Jared Verse, Nolan Smith was a strong candidate for me after how he finished this season. I think he's a really good buy at the DL spot. But YaYa Diaby was the person I went with. And if I'm honest, I went with him because I thought one of you guys was going to choose Nolan Smith. So, but I've been talking about Diaby many weeks, every week almost, in my weekly DLF article, and he was one of the guys who was consistently disruptive but wasn't always reaping the rewards. And I like guys like this because we know that over time those sacks will come if these players continue to bring pressure on a consistent basis. He did finish the year with 3 sacks in his last 3, but he only finished as the DL 32 in Big 3 scoring because he only had 6 sacks from 70 pressures. Now, those 70 pressures ranked 9th amongst all edge players, but those 6 sacks ranked only 42nd. Like I say, we know those sacks are going to come. I think there's a great case to be made in terms of buying low on him right now. And I think he's got a shot at like finishing as a DL 15 next year, if I'm being honest. And I think that's again like a really low risk, medium to high reward kind of deal that you could be looking at right now if you were to make a move and acquire Diaby.
Yeah, and he's someone who appeared a couple of times in my DL streaming article, which meant he was available in 75% plus of IDP leagues at some point this season. So the market is still very lukewarm on him, which makes this a pretty good time to buy, because if he keeps having the kinds of performance, and he's one of those guys who kept like going over the threshold where he was in a little bit too many leagues to be in my articles, but he was someone who consistently, the metrics and the snaps and everything were pointing to him being in a good position to score. So I think the market is a little bit slower than it should be on him. So this is probably your chance to buy, because if he puts it together next season, and even if he doesn't have a DL 15 or DE 15 kind of finish, even if he has a top 24 kind of finish, his price is only going to go up, and he's still young and doesn't have a ton of competition. So I see no reason why he can't surpass his numbers from this year going into next year.
Yep.
Yeah, he's got a lot of pass rush juice. It's fun to watch him out there. You can just see it. Like, he's going to bust out for like a big sack year, and you want to be ahead of that. That's a good buy.
All righty. So DL sells. Scott, kick us off.
This is another one that I might get some heat for, but I feel like I've got some good data to back myself up here. I would sell Calijah Kancey if I have him, and I don't happen to have him in many leagues because I was higher on Carter in their rookie years, and I drafted him everywhere instead. So Adam has his trade value as a second, and I think the market is incredibly high on him, and some of that juice that he has is very much warranted. From weeks 6 to 17, he was the overall defensive tackle 8. He was 16th in snaps, which is still really good for defensive tackles after week 6. But if you dig more into his performance, he has scary PFF numbers. So PFF numbers aren't the be-all, end-all. But when they're as bad as Kancey's are, something likely gives at some point, especially in positions that feature heavy rotations like the defensive line. So to give you a sense of how bad Kancey's PFF numbers are, out of all interior defensive linemen, so there were 230 or some that PFF had some kind of grades on last season. He was 207th in run defense, which is just abysmal. And you would think, okay, well, if he's a terrible run defender, he must be a fantastic pass rusher. His pass rush grade was 80th. So overall, his PFF grades, and everyone I think knows that they range on a scale from 0 to 100. His rookie year was a 49.7 overall grade. Last year was a 46 overall grade. So he put up fantasy production. I can't deny that. But if I can move out of him Adam has him as a second, if I can move out of him for a third and get one of the top interior defensive linemen or even one of the top edges in my drafts this year, I would gladly do that, because I don't know that this is sustainable for him. I could be wrong. I know there's a lot of people who like him a lot, but part of this is if I can get a second or early third for most IDP, I would take it. But Kancey is someone who I just, don't have all that much faith in.
I'd also take a second for Kancey, actually. The one thing that gives me some pause is what are they seeing in him that maybe PFF and so occasionally we aren't, because his snap share towards the end of the year was massive, and I'm sat here wondering why. So they, for as much as I believe in PFF grades, I don't immediately dismiss them. I don't invest overly in them either, but what are they seeing that the rest of us aren't? They must be seeing something.
Yeah. I don't know. I would be on the other side of Scott from this, like for a second round rookie pick, especially in a league. If you're in leagues that, you're starting defensive tackles, not just, defensive linemen. I like Kancey a lot. So I kind of put a lot into what kind of the rate of plays that defensive linemen make into the backfield. And so I was just bringing it up. And so he had 17 quarterback hits and 11 tackles for loss on 541 snaps. And so if you kind of use that as like a ratio, he was actually third in the league in what I would call like a backfield disruption score, right behind Leonard Williams and Zach Allen. So I think he's probably, that to me demonstrates his ability to be able to work through the line, get to the backfield, and make plays. And so I think I would probably go on the other side of Kancey. But again, it all comes down to price. If like somebody's willing to give you a first round rookie pick, then you can get a good offensive player. I'll sell. But I don't know if I'm dipping into the second. But then again, I haven't really dug too much into the rookie class yet.
Yeah. So a couple of real quick rebuttals, and I promise I won't get too defensive with this. But in terms of why he was on the field, Tampa had an incredibly shallow defensive line room, and they had pretty much one-to-one replacements. So when Vita Vea wasn't out there, Greg Gaines was, because they're similar body type. They do the same kind of thing. The only real pressure behind Kancey was Logan Hall, and given Kancey had more draft capital, this is only his second year, so I could see them running him out there to see what he can do. And Jason, to your point, he did put up good numbers, but compared to, you mentioned Leonard Williams and Zach Allen, they both graded out really well and put up those great ratios. Mm-hmm. It makes me concerned a little bit that Kancey graded out so poorly and put up those ratios, in that, one stat I love that PFF tracks is something like QB pressures that are the QB's fault. So how often QBs are like running into sacks. Yeah. I think it'd be interesting. I don't think it'd be interesting to see. I think that it might be telling that his grades are so poor, but his stats are so good that you have a big space eater like Vita Vea who's there, who might just be freeing up some things for him to just run into without necessarily putting up that great video on tape. So I'm not trying to say that we know players do luck into sacks sometimes and luck into TFLs. I don't know that I want to make that accusation of a very large, very strong man in the NFL, that he's just lucky to have the stats that he has. But when I see great numbers, bad PFF grades. I worry if it might have been an outlier that will regress downward rather than, like PFF numbers are great, but no pressures like Derrick Brown we were talking about, where we expect some positive regression to be occurring. But I get it. People love Kancey, and I think that he has a lot of momentum right now, and this could be a good time to sell. But I could be absolutely wrong too. I just don't have him in my top 10 dynasty DTs yet, and I know most people do.
Yeah, and not to labour the point too much on Kancey, but it's a point worth making that we've talked a lot about his pressures and disruptive plays. But if you're even if you're in a DT league or DT required league that scores tackles highly, that's a situation where he's not going to help you a huge amount because his tackle volume and tackle efficiency is dreadful. So he's never gonna be that guy. Really, that wasn't who he was in college. That's not who he's proven to be so far in the NFL. It would be a massive surprise if he were to ever become this guy that could top, could achieve sort of pretty high numbers in terms of tackle volume. So that's a consideration as well sometimes, and one that I often overlook. I think when talking about these guys, I think only about them in terms of the pass rush capabilities and not sometimes, this weekly flaw, we talk about it often, and that tends to come from things like tackles. Going back to Derrick Brown, these two guys couldn't be any more different. Jason, who's your sell? Defensive line.
Yeah, I'm going to get us off the Tampa Bay train here. I've got Harold Landry as a sell. So overall, Big Three scoring finished as the edge 10. His points per game wasn't quite that good, but it was still edge 2 worthy. He had 13 points per game on the average. But here's the thing. His pressures were the lowest total of his 6-year career. He had just 30 pressures on the season. He had 9 sacks on that. So that, I don't know, it just seems like it's not very repeatable. He was, again, kind of buoyed, of course, by these high tackle totals that he's known for. He had 71 on the season. That was tied for third best among edges. So it's not really a sell at all costs. But if I have Landry on any rosters, and if I feel like I can get like a third plus a player that I like, I think I'm really open to moving Landry right now.
Yeah, and he's been one of those guys that's been he's actually performed. He's been very productive pretty much every year that he's played, but then when you look at those top 10 snap totals at the position, he's always in that top 10 as well. Credit to him for kind of like converting that opportunity into production, but at the same time, he's not an elite edge rusher. I don't think anyone's ever said that. So, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan. I considered Landry as one of my sells, and then I went back and looked at his production in previous years and noted that his pressure numbers have never been great. I know they were lower this year, but they've never been amongst the best at the position. It's always been snap volume that's helped him along, buoyed by some of those tackle numbers as well. I don't know that that's going to change enough for me to want to sell him if I've already got him. I wouldn't go out and buy him, but if I've got him, I'm not so sure that we wouldn't be seeing kind of the same thing again next year, Jason. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not a huge fan of the player, but I wouldn't be surprised if next year he went out and put up 10 sacks, 50, 60 tackles again and had poor PFF numbers.
I could definitely see the tackles repeating. I don't know about those sack numbers, but yeah, you're right. He's got it on paper because he just keeps doing it. Mm-hmm. At some point, my guess is it's going to stop.
Yeah, because it feels like that pressure to sack ratio, I know he's sustained it the past couple of seasons, but it's not sustainable. I looked into this earlier in the year, and I think the average is something like 8 pressures to 1 sack across the league. So if he's more like a 3-to-1 ratio, and he's done it a couple of times, but just because someone's an outlier a few times doesn't mean they're an exception to a rule. And I think that and his regression may still keep him a viable DE2 or DE3 maybe, but if you can sell him as a really solid DE2, then that seems like a good cash out point to me.
Okay, so my defensive lineman sell, or edge sell, if you will, is going to ruffle some feathers. It's a bold choice and a controversial one, as I've gone with Andrew Van Ginkel. And, as I consider what makes a player a good sell candidate, I looked down my list and I tried to find a guy who satisfied all of the following criteria. So value, I want to know I can get good value for the player. That's an obvious one, right? And AVG most definitely gives us that, as he finished the first overall edge in Big Three scoring. Secondly, I want it to be a guy who is nearer the end of his career than the start, but not so old that it kills his value. And at 29 years old, AVG kind of fits the bill. Thirdly, I want a player whose output might decline. And I think it's more than likely that AVG won't hit the same numbers again next season. I think he'll still be good. I want to make that point really clear. He's proven that over the course of the last 2 seasons. It wasn't just a one-season wonder. 2 seasons now he's been really good. But I think the crazy numbers he managed last year, even if he had no competition, I think doing better than that next year would be really difficult, would be a pretty incredible feat. Jonathan Greenard's going nowhere. Dallas Turner's going to be more involved, right? Going into his second, hopefully healthier season. So I think, although we all enjoyed AVG for what he did this season, and while I acknowledge it again, I'm going to make the point second time over, I know he's going to be good in 2025. To my mind, I think it's a reasonable assertion that the right, or at least the best time to sell him is right now.
Yeah, honestly, he gives me some like Justin Matabike vibes in that great player, but that 1 year's performance is not going to be sustainable for the next. And if managers are expecting that to happen again, or are willing to pay as if it's going to happen again, then I would definitely be willing to move on.
Yeah, no argument here.
All right, I expected more of a fight. I'm pleased. So DL holds then. Scott.
Yeah, I promise this one is not pandering to the hosts of the IDP show, but Jaelan Phillips is someone I would hold. I wasn't bold enough to say he's a buy. The injuries are too scary for me to want to run out and get him, unlike someone like Derrick Brown, and then the buy that I'll mention here shortly for defensive backs, where they seem a little bit more isolated. But Jaelan Phillips is someone, I do have him in a couple of leagues. I update my trade bait frequently. I'm a big trader in the offseason, and he's someone that I don't have listed anywhere. To me, this is a very low valuation for him. Adam has him as worth a fourth. A fourth would be somewhat tempting, but again, if he completely craters and doesn't come back, then maybe if I'm in an 8-round draft, there's a really big drop off to between a fourth and an eighth. But if he plays like we know he can play, then he's going to vastly outperform that valuation, and you'll be glad that you held. He played 8 games only in 2023, which I know is not ideal, but in 5 of those 8 games, he scored over 25 fantasy points. So he is someone who has done it when he's been healthy. He's only 25 years old. He also does have competition in terms of Bradley Chubb coming back and Chop Robinson, who's ascendant. So to me, there are just so many signals that, hey, I would buy him on his past production and his relatively low valuation, but man, I would sell him because there's so much uncertainty. So that's where I ended up landing on a hold for Jaelan Phillips.
I think you pegged that there. That's the uncertainty there. It's like the balance of things with Jaelan Phillips, just like guides you right to hold. I'd be really worried about giving up any kind of good asset to get him, but also I like him. I don't really want to let him go either. So
yeah, if he leans further in one direction than the other, for me, he's more of a buy than a sell. Given that we've not seen the best of him now for a season or 2 really. I like Phillips, and I think he's got a lot to offer. But I think right now his value is possibly at its lowest. He had that big first year, a bit lucky in terms of the sack volume, and second year, big pressure numbers, similar sack numbers again. Third year, low pressures, high sacks. I think, after a season out, his value is at its lowest. I think he's nearer a buy than a sell, but I appreciate why you've got him as a hold there, Scott.
Yep.
So, Jason, what about you? Who have you got here?
I'm going to go with Montez Sweat. So he is coming off a massively disappointing season in Chicago. don't think he was terrible from a real life standpoint, but he was pretty terrible for fantasy. Points per game. I mean, he was 54th in 2024. That was 8.25 points per game. One season earlier, 2023, he was points per game edge 15, averaged almost 15 points per game. So it's like he's a better player than what we saw this year. I'm kind of hoping that he'll be revitalized by this big regime change there in Chicago with Ben Johnson as the new head coach and now Dennis Allen as the new defensive coordinator. Because we really should be able to think about Montez Sweat as a pretty consistent edge too in our lineups. I'm not aggressively buying, but I'm certainly not selling in what is surely kind of a really deflated market for his services. But I mean, size-wise, he seems like he's a really good fit for what Dennis Allen wants to do with his edges. He'd be a buy, but kind of the underlying numbers, I think, were not bad, but they were just okay for somebody of his caliber. He had like 12 QB hits, 9 tackles for loss, 49 pressures. Some of that I feel like is impacted by snaps that were more weighted to the run versus the pass, but still just like very underwhelming. So he's just kind of a hold for me.
We were talking earlier before about pressures to sack ratios and who is really out of whack one way or the other. Montez Sweat is one of the guys who is in line for some positive regression. He had 49 pressures, but only 6 sacks. That ratio is one of the worst among edges last year. YaYa Diaby also had a terrible ratio, suggesting that he is due to have a little bit more success there. And Jared Verse was actually pretty wild. 89 pressures to only 8 sacks. So, there's a few guys who really seem to be primed to make a leap, and I could see Sweat being that guy. I'm not going to bank on it, which is why I think he's a good hold right now, but he definitely has that upside to bounce back.
Yep. Okay, so my guy here, guys, is Maxx Crosby. And I've chosen him here because I think selling him now would mean losing an elite player at his lowest value. It's only right to acknowledge that his pressure rate dropped off. But he still managed 8 sacks in 12 games. And I think with sort of going forward, Carroll coming in, we saw that Crosby was very frustrated at times last year. He made no secret of the fact that he was frustrated at times last year. And it's really difficult to quantify how much of a difference that makes in a player's performance. But it's a point that's often overlooked when we're looking at these spreadsheets and looking at pressure rates and looking at pass rush win rates. And we know who Crosby is. We know he's an elite player. He's been doing it forever and a day. So when we're looking for reasons to try to understand why he dropped off a little bit last year, I think it's fair in his case, and certainly in the case of players who we've seen consistent elite play over the course of many years, to wonder if there is something more to be said for how that player is feeling, what's going on off the field. Like I say, Carroll's coming in. Crosby's already talked about how he likes him. And I think, a happier version of Crosby on the field than we saw last year could lead him to a bit of a bounce back season. And for those reasons, I did think about choosing him as my DL to buy, but I also don't think that his value would have dropped far enough to make him so. So instead, he's my DL hold this year.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I was just thinking about, I don't have Crosby anywhere in Dynasty, but if I did, it would probably take a first to get him from me. And I don't know that I would even do it then because I have drafted, I drafted like Nick Bosa late first years ago. So I have used the occasional draft capital, late first, early second on an IDP, but I can't see, drafting someone this year, their upside in 2 or 3 years is what Crosby can do for you. So he is sort of a, you have him, you just have to kind of keep riding his success because, what you're going to get for him isn't probably going to be enough to move the needle unless you're just like stacked at defensive end and you have a need at wide receiver because he is one of those few IDP that you could probably trade for an offensive asset because he is so good and has that name quality. But I think he's a pretty solid hold. It would take a really strong offer to get him from me, and I would not pay what it would take to buy him anywhere.
Yeah, well said. Ditto.
Nicely summed up. So DBs. On to the DBs then, guys. So, Scott, who's your DB buy?
This, I think, is my riskiest buy of all of them. My DB buy is Jaquan Brisker, who's a safety in Chicago who missed pretty much all of the season with a concussion. Still did not clear the concussion protocol the last week of the season. They're not disclosing what element of it he can't seem to clear, but this is his third concussion in 3 years in the league, which is absolutely cause for pause and cause for panic. But I know there was also a lot of panic 2 years ago about Tua, which was understandable given how many head injuries he had and thinking that his career might be over. So I think Brisker should be a pretty cheap buy right now. I would imagine you could get him for a fifth, maybe even a sixth in many leagues where they don't expect him to come back. And if he doesn't come back, then a fifth or a sixth is a lottery ticket on a rookie anyway. And so if he does come back, then he was safety 10 in 22, safety 17 in 23, even though he did miss 2 games with concussion in 23. So he's a buy. He's a risky buy. To me, he's someone who I would try to use as like a throw-in in another trade. So if I'm close to a deal with somebody, I would say, all right, well, how about you add in Brisker and I'll send you a fifth or sixth back on top of it, or maybe even a fourth if I'm already sort of up a little bit in the trade. So I'm looking to get Brisker if the price is right, but I can acknowledge that this is a very risky play given its head injuries, and head injuries are weird.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what kind of role he's going to play in Dennis Allen's scheme. So I'm assuming he's going to be one of the deep safeties, but I don't know that. But yeah, you're right. It's a little bit risky. But again, cost-wise.
It's really going to be interesting, isn't it, when we get into these mock drafts where people like a Brisker goes, because he's, we've seen at defensive back, sometimes they hold on to perceptions a little bit too long, I think, more so than at other positions even. And Brisker is definitely been one of those guys who's kind of been at the forefront of people's minds when they start to consider which defensive back they're going to take in these drafts. He was the DB 8 in those IDP best ball drafts last year, and I think, I don't know, I'm not sure that enough people would be put off by the concussions, or would be as put off by the concussions as they should be. So I don't know that I would buy him. It really depends on what other people's value of him is, and we don't have a clear picture of that right now. And I worry, as I say, that people would still value him too much for me to want to give up what it would take to acquire him.
I think it's fair.
Jason, what have you got for us here? Who's your DB buy?
Yeah, I would say in general, like, I'm not going to go out and aggressively buy safety, but if I was to do so, I'm going to make it a good one. So I'm going to be poking around Antoine Winfield just to see if he's coming at a nice discount off a season in which he played just 9 games due to 2 separate injuries. So one of those was an ankle injury that kept him out from weeks 2 to 5, and then that patella injury in his knee in week 14 that cost him the rest of the regular season. So even with that goose egg that he had in week 14, his points per game average was still 12.7, which still put him in the safety 1 range. He's just a great player. Coming up on his age 27 season, still very much in the prime of his career. And if I can get him at a discount off of an injury-plagued year, then I'll go ahead and make that move on Winfield.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned this, because I feel like sometimes we make assumptions that people will, as I may have just done with Brisker, people may value these guys much higher than we do. But if you put out enough trade offers, it's sometimes surprising what you get back, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, listen, in one league I was in this year, granted, like, it's safety and the market's, kind of flooded. That somebody just dropped him because he was injured and they needed the spot. And so I was like really quickly going, because it was after waivers had run, really quickly run in there and grab him. And so you've got leagues like that where people just don't value safeties, or, they're not really paying as close attention to the defensive side of the ball as they are on offense. So you're right. You throw out enough offers and you see, like, you can get somebody really cheap that's actually a really good dynasty asset.
Yep. So my guy here is, and I feel like my offer is a bit weak compared to your 2 names, guys, but I've gone with Dadrion Taylor-Demerson. And It's a bit of a gamble, as Buda Baker isn't going anywhere, and Jalen Thompson remains under contract, obviously. But Thompson was pretty damn poor last year. He's carrying a cap number of 14 million in 2025, and the Cards can save almost 7 million by cutting him pre-June the 1st. Now, they do have plenty of projected cap space, but they also have a lot of roster needs. So leaving a player like Taylor-Demerson on the bench, I don't think makes a lot of sense when he can kind of do a lot of the same things as Thompson. From a physicality standpoint, he's almost exactly the same height, same weight, similar type of player. So, yeah, I mean, in summary, I think at worst, I think Thompson stays, and we might see a bit of a continuation of what we saw last year when Taylor-Demerson became more involved as a third safety, in which case, he'll take over in 2026, barring disaster, when Thompson leaves. And at best, I think Thompson goes and Taylor-Demerson takes over full time, in which case that's a huge win. So I like his outlook either way.
Yeah, I would imagine he's dirt cheap in most leagues. But Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I would think he'd be dirt cheap for sure. I have to admit, I really didn't see much of him this year, so I can't really comment on the player. But yeah, Thompson can obviously shift back into the slot if they go that direction. For sure, Thompson's coming off of what seems like to be a bad year. I would think, like, if nothing else, a restructure may be in order there, bring that cap number down.
Yeah, possibly, if he's willing, right? But yeah, Taylor-Demerson came on stronger, not strong, I wouldn't say, but stronger towards the end of the year. Kind of his snap volume, his snap share increased in that final month and a half, and I'm just wondering whether they got a little bit tired of Thompson. Didn't seem to be the case because he continued to play every down, but Taylor-Demerson, I was kind of intrigued by him when I saw him go as, what was he, 4th round, high 4th, late 3rd. He wasn't really on my board as one of the top safeties, and he was outside of the top 5 safeties taken, but I kind of had my eye on him because I didn't really have him on my radar going into the draft, and he went a little higher than I imagined he would. So yeah, he's a guy that I think it's another one of those ones. It's really low risk, and the rewards are it's a medium level kind of reward, I think, with this kind of person. But I think you can do a lot worse than to see how cheaply you can acquire him, because I think you might be surprised. So yeah. Who's your sell, Scott?
Yeah, so I'm just selling all kinds of great IDP assets from my teams, but I always love to retool, and I usually am deficient in offense, so I need draft capital. And Devon Witherspoon is the kind of guy who I would trade away. Now, we know Adam has a soft spot there, and his trade valuations, there's a disclaimer that this is what it would take for me to move them. So his valuation of a second rounder for Witherspoon is probably not going to match, I'm guessing, a lot of leagues. You're not going to be able to get a second for him many places. But if you could even get a third for him, a third for a corner, I would do that every day. He's a great player. He was CB8 in 2024, CB9 in 2023, 10th highest graded PFF corner. So he's got the talent to stay on the field. We don't expect anything to change. He should keep producing. But this is just sort of a philosophical thing to me, where if I can get a relatively high pick for any corner, I will take that relatively high pick for any corner, other than the one that I'm going to talk about holding here. It would take an awful lot to pry him away from me. But Witherspoon is the kind of guy where I think he'll be great again this year. But the drop off from Witherspoon to a streamer is likely much less than the drop off of the kind of guy I can get in the second or third, potentially on offense, to the next guy there, especially if you're in like an 11-11 league where there's a lot of IDP assets floating around, but offense starts to get very, very scarce on the back end. So love Witherspoon, but if I can get a second, instant accept. If I can get a third, I will not haggle with you there either.
Yeah, the point you made about replacement value is everything, I think, when it comes to Witherspoon and really any cornerback, right? When you say that he's finishing as a top 10 cornerback every year, that kind of sounds good at first, but then I bet you in that top 10 or among those top 10 corners, there's a bunch of guys that weren't even being drafted. So like you say, you can get a third. I can't imagine anyone would offer a third for Witherspoon, but you never know. So yeah, if you can get a third, take it.
Yeah, you see those quarterbacks drop off all the time. Year after year to year, it's like it's so hard for them. I think they hold that production because their roles change based on needs of the team. So it's really hard to predict. And so yeah, you're right. Even right, you look at a guy like Witherspoon, you're like, yeah, of course, like he's going to be top 10. Like chances are he's not. it's just the way it goes with quarterbacks. So you take good capital if you can get it. Yep.
Yep. So who's your sell, Jason?
Yeah, I think mine will be pretty quick. It's Kerby Joseph of the Lions. He was a low-end safety one on the season, thanks to 9 interceptions. He had 83 total tackles. That's in line with guys like Donovan Wilson, Taylor Rapp, Tony Adams. They're in that same range. I think most people probably see Joseph as a deep center fielder, but PFF had him 11th among all safeties for box snaps. So the alignment isn't really the reason that I'm looking to sell here. It's just those 9 interceptions, and it's a far-fetched to see that happen again. So yeah, I'm taking a good offer for Joseph, and I'm not looking back.
And it's a shame, isn't it, where we have to say this about these guys who do perform at an elite level at a defensive back, right? It's probably one of the few positions where they can be one of the best performers at their position in the NFL, and yet in terms of fantasy scoring, in terms of fantasy projections going forward, Joseph could play at exactly the same level next year, but not pick the ball away from the quarterback in 7-8 successive games to start the season, and he's going to finish much lower. It's a real shame, I think. But you're right.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic. Love the player. I wish he's a lot better than Minkah Fitzpatrick this year. That's for sure. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a fantasy game. So Kerby Joseph, I'm sure you're watching right now. Love the player, but yeah, I'd sell you in fantasy.
Yeah, I imagine someone would mention him tonight. I thought either him or Xavier McKinney would come up for very similar reasons. So yeah, good shout. So my one is a no-brainer. I think, and we covered some of the reasons why on the ADP Hits and Misses show a few weeks back, but he was targeted 110 times last year, was first among all cornerbacks in that sense. That helped him to put up 11 pass breakups. It also helped him to put up really nice tackle volume because he was so poor in coverage that he allowed more than 70% of those targets to be completed and then made the tackle. He also led all corners with 5 sacks, and a combination of those factors made him the cornerback 1 and the DB 4 in Big 3 scoring. But most of that production came when he was playing in the slot. Midway through the year, when Taylor moved outside, his numbers really dipped. We saw Ugo Amadi, who took over the slot role midway through the year. His numbers spiked the rest of the way, proving, or at least I think strongly suggesting, that the production we saw from both players was more of a role thing than something we can kind of attribute to the player. Now, the one caveat I need to mention is that Amadi is a free agent, and the Saints are in a massive hole when it comes to projected cap space. It's looking really dire for them. So there is a chance, I think, that Amadi has to leave. Taylor moves back to the slot. But even then, going back to our earlier point, we know that top DBs tend to struggle to repeat as top DBs in the following year. So that's especially so at cornerback. So for that reason, Taylor was still, for me, an easy choice as someone to sell at the position.
Yeah, I'm never going to argue against selling a corner, so it's fine with me.
Easy pickings. DB holds. Scott, we're on the final run. Then this is your final nomination.
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned it'd be hard to talk me into not selling a corner. There's one exception, and that's Keisean Nixon. Even if you don't do leagues with return yards, he had 56 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 26 assists, 3 sacks. He plays a lot of that slot corner role that is so productive for fantasy. If you are in a league that does return yards, he was 6th in the league in return yards, had a great average. So he is someone who gets you that little nice bonus there as well. In my leagues that are really kind of return yard heavy, he finished as CB1 and a top 10 fantasy asset for IDP. So he's someone who performed well, even if the return yards go away. But I was reading a really deep dive from ESPN earlier this week about the kickoff rule and how much it changed things or didn't change things. And they saw that 32.8 of kickoffs were returned last season, which was up significantly from 23, where it was only 21.8. But that number of 32.8% of kickoffs returned was still the second lowest number of the past 20 years. So if the league is unhappy with the amount of kickoffs that are still being returned and do even more to incentivize it in terms of any kind of rule tweak, then Nixon's value only goes up to me. So he's someone who I had people come after him because I have him everywhere. I've always had a soft spot for IDP who are returners. I thought about Marcus Jones here too, but he's only being used as a punt returner now. And I saw they did retain the Patriots retained their special teams coordinator. So, he doesn't have as much upside as I thought, but Nixon is someone who I do have him. I'm not trading him unless you make me just an insane offer. But he is a hold for me. I see the regular IDP production coming back, and I think that the return yardage is going to be similar, if not better, next year.
This is your Myles Garrett. If you're the Browns, this is your Myles Garrett. Huh? Like, I'm not trading him.
And the nice thing about Nixon this season, or last season rather than in 2023, is that he was out on the field almost every down in most games, whereas the year before, there was that slight concern that he could lay a goose egg if he didn't get that return yardage because he wasn't on the field nearly as much as he was this season. So that just gives you again that kind of like warm fuzzy feeling that he's got every opportunity to produce those points that we sorely need, and which can often be difference makers at the cornerback spot. So yeah, I like this shout. Who have you got, Jason?
Yeah, I'm a little bit all over the place here with Josh Metellus. So he's your leader in box snaps by safety with 493 on the season, but he had a bit of a down year compared to his 2023 season, using big three scoring 9.7 points per game in 2024 compared to 13.3 in the previous year. And so that's the difference between a solid safety 1 and a safety 3. He had this nice stretch when Ivan Pace was out, but otherwise you typically just wanted a better option in your lineup. So I was trying to look at what happened. And so he played 74 fewer snaps, but his usage was down from 94% to 87%. The big thing was that he blitzed a lot less. So he blitzed on 91 snaps in 23 versus 56 snaps in 2024. So, of course, his plays in the backfield were down. And pressures, he went from 29 to 19. Quarterback hits dropped from 10 to 6. Sacks dropped from 2.5 to 0. And tackles for loss dropped from 7 to 2. So he blitzed a lot less because he was in the box more. He was further away from the QB at the snap. So his defensive line snaps dropped all the way down from 206 down to 62. His slot snaps dropped from 396 down to 320. So this offseason, the Vikings have Cameron Bynum and Harrison Smith, actually even Byron Murphy, their slot corner, all going into free agency. You've got Brian Flores back, which is, I think, a good thing for Metellus. I'm just not sure which way this is going to go, which is, I'm not selling low. I don't know that I really want to go out and buy, even on the, off a down year. So I think I'm just kind of holding on right now. He's 27. He's got the upside to put up S1 numbers. Just not so confident that he's going to do it again.
Yeah, you summed that up really well, I think. The big plays lacking, sacks, forced fumbles, and like you say, he played more coverage snaps than he did as a pass rusher or in the box defending the run. But we would hope with that kind of utilization that his plays in coverage, those big plays in coverage, the interceptions, the pass breakups would increase. That wasn't the case. But yeah, right there with you with a hold. I wanted to make a strong case for an argument as we got down the stretch here, but I can't do it. I agree with you entirely with Metellus. So let's see if we can go out with a bang. I suspect not, though. This, I think, will be a fairly popular selection. I've gone with Tyler Nubin. And my justification here is pretty simple. He finished the year as the DB 93 in Big Three scoring, which probably left, I think, a lot of IDP managers a little bit disappointed, right? Now, part of the reason for that was the 4 games he missed towards the end of the year, but the other part of that is that he produced no big plays at all. I think he had 1 pass breakup, and that was it in 13 games, playing almost every down. So some guys just go through years like that, don't they? Right? And we see this from time to time, even with guys who we assume are big, have a lot of big play potential. Nubin was that guy in college, so it's kind of a surprise that that didn't sort of carry over into his rookie year. But I'd bet big money that he would improve in that sense going forward. And even if he somehow doesn't, I'm kind of encouraged by that tackle production last year. He ranked 8th amongst all safeties in tackle efficiency. So I think he's the kind of player we kind of want to sit on, hope that tackle volume and tackle efficiency continues, and just wait for the splash plays to catch up.
Yeah, no argument here. It's kind of one of those guys that, he's coming off a strong rookie year. People aren't going to want to sell him. So if you wanted to buy him, you're going to have to overpay for him. If you got him, you still got that upside like you mentioned. So you're not really looking to sell him. He's just a great hold.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is arguing, but I will throw something back at you that you threw at me a little bit ago. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, for me, he's probably closer to a sell than a hold. Just because he's a safety. We know how much volatility there is in that position. He could end up being even greater. I mean, he had great numbers until he got hurt, so he could be a top safety asset. But if I'm in a league with Adam and he is willing to give a third, then you can have Nubin for a third in an instant. So I agree that he's probably a hold. I'm not running out to try to get him anywhere. And if I have him, it would take a strong offer to get him from me. But he probably is closer to a sell than a hold for me, just because he was sort of that top safety rookie IDP asset last year, and someone who might want that instead of diving back into the rookie market might be willing to overpay a little bit. But I think hold is justified as well.
And although I should disagree with your point, I don't. I think a third would tempt me to trade away Nubin, because I'm holding on the basis that no one's going to offer a third. But yeah, if someone came in for the third, we got to
play more leagues with Adam. It seems like there's a few guys that he loves that we're not quite as high on, and we could just have all that draft capital if we can find a way to get those players beforehand. And maybe in a startup draft, just get all these guys and then just walk away with a ton of draft capital afterwards.
Yeah, I'm wondering what how many trades does he make? I'm just curious to know. If I put my values out, this is my trade value on everybody. Mm-hmm. Send me an offer.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm right there with you. As I say, listed him as a hold on the basis that no one's going to be offering me a third, maybe even a fourth for a DB. Certainly not for a rookie DB that missed some time in his rookie year. But yeah, if someone came in at that level, I'd be all over that. All right, guys. With that brings us to the end of the show. How are we feeling about our choices in general? Any major surprises for you guys?
Well, the Kancey pick was kind of a surprise for me. I think that's a good debatable player right there. So I like it, Scott. I disagree with you, but I like your stance. I would say if we were in a league together and you had him, we'd be talking trade right after the show.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I'm mostly shocked and concerned about my own picks, especially my sells, because like I said, I like to sell high on IDP, partially because I have IDP hubris that I'm going to be able to, trade a fifth for a veteran player who's going to perform at least close enough similarly, and then use that earlier draft capital, not necessarily even to take a rookie. I love to spend early draft capital to trade for a 4th, 5th, 6th-year player who's proven and still kind of in a prime. So yeah, I didn't realize that I was picking 3, I think what would largely be considered elite IDP assets with Campbell, Kancey, and Witherspoon. But part of it is like I said, if I can get really good value for guys other than Kancey, because Kancey is someone who, I don't see it. I had him in my second year cells when I wrote up a little article like that last off season. So I didn't see it after year one. The production was much better, but the stats weren't there. But I don't want to get back on my anti-Kancey soapbox here, because this is just more fire for when he ends up as DT1 next year for everyone to be like, oh, that idiot. So, yeah, this was fun though. I really did have a blast doing this.
It's been great having you guys on, and thanks for sparing the time to come on and share your thoughts. It's been great hanging out with you both and talking IDP. Again, we most definitely will revisit this with you two next year, and we'll talk nothing but Kancey for like an hour and a half. And we'll all be watching his progress very closely over the course of the season to see which of you emerges victorious. Maybe a little wager is in order, but yeah, look, guys, before we do call it a day, if you're working on any content this off season, please can you share what you're up to with our audience, and if you're planning that far ahead, tell us what you'll be doing during the 2025 season as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so the thing I have going right now for one more week is the big state of IDP survey. We have last count about 250 leagues in the database. So this is just a way for us to learn more about how folks play fantasy and what the trends are, what's increasing, what's decreasing in terms of IDP. Any information is better than none. It takes 2 minutes to add one of your leagues to the survey. You can get a membership to the IDP show. There's a raffle for that. I'm kicking in some money to donate to charities that you can nominate if you want to as part of it. So really want to get as many leagues represented as possible. This is data I share with the entire community because I really just want us all to be better at serving everyone out there and understanding the ways that you play and making sure, we're not just, I love chopping it up with the two of you, but if it turned out that dynasty leagues were incredibly on the decline, which they're not, is what the data says, but then, you pivot and you do something else that's going to be really useful to folks. So if you haven't yet, please add your league or leagues to that. The link is on my X. It's on the IDP show, most of my DT articles. I'm going to be doing a bunch of IDP drafts episodes this offseason. I'm going to be doing combined rookie ranks here shortly and just working on a bunch of little side projects here and there as well. And then I'll be back next season with my DL streaming article looking at very, very under-rostered defensive tackles and defensive ends that can be gotten and started in a pinch if you have an injury or maybe as a full-blown strategy. So that's all the stuff that I have going on. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say thanks for that IDP survey. Like I punched my leagues in there. It really doesn't take that long. It's great data for everybody. And then you do a really fantastic job on that DL streaming article in the year. I definitely pulled some starts out of that this year. So thank you for doing that. Right now, I'm starting work on a series over at Dynasty League Football. It's the annual rookie review. So it's just kind of going by position, taking a really quick look at how the rookies fared and what kind of they're set up for moving forward. I think this is going to be my 5th year doing that. Just upkeeping my top 150 ranks, and of course, right now doing starting into the rookie research very early on right now, so that I'll be ready to churn out some rookie IDP rankings too.
There's lots to look forward to from both of you, and that kind of makes me very happy to hear. Anyone listening, if you're not following these guys, go and follow them. They're good people, and they're super clever when it comes to IDP. All right, and as always, a big thanks to our audience. Quick reminder, we'll bringing you a new episode every week of the IDP After Show or the IDP Show during the off season. Alternating between the two. Whenever the IDP After Show isn't on, the IDP Show will be on. Whenever the IDP Show isn't on, the IDP After Show will be on. So, if you aren't already, please remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube to make sure you aren't missing out on all the good stuff we're bringing your way. In the meantime, and as I won't be speaking to you guys and girls until the 12th of February, have fun watching the Super Bowl, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
This was the IDP After Show.